Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Whispering Willow. Holly Arnold stood at the edge of a fog-draped field on the Isle of Wight, staring at the gnarled silhouette of the weeping willow. The tree loomed at the heart of the island's oldest graveyard, where moss-covered tombstones leaned haphazardly as if the earth itself had tried to swallow them. Beneath the moonless sky, the tree's drooping branches resembled skeletal arms reaching down to caress the gravestones. It was said that the willow had stood there for centuries, a silent sentinel over the dead, its roots winding deep into the graves below. Local legends whispered that the souls of the departed found solace in the tree's shade, their voices murmuring in the rustle of its leaves. But Holly had never believed in such tales until she lost her husband, Daniel, 3 months ago. Grief had consumed her, a weight that pressed against her chest every waking moment. She had stopped visiting friends, had barely spoken to anyone, but the whispers of the willow had reached her in her most desperate moments. Her mother had once told her that in ancient times people believed weeping willows were conduits to the spirit world, places where the living could communicate with the dead. The story had seemed like a cruel joke until she started hearing the whispers at night, faint but unmistakable. Daniel's voice. That's what had drawn her here tonight, under the suffocating gloom. The air was thick with moisture, the smell of rain-soaked earth hanging heavy. Holly clutched the locket around her neck, the one Daniel had given her on their anniversary, a reminder of a life that now felt impossibly distant. As she approached the willow, the wind picked up, its breath cold against her skin. The branches swayed, their long tendrils whispering softly against each other. She closed her eyes, her breath shaky, waiting, listening. Nothing. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. The wind died down, leaving the cemetery in eerie silence. Holly's pulse quickened. She took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the presence of the tree, its ancient power looming over her, wrapping her in its shadow. Then, faintly from somewhere deep within the willow's branches, she heard it, a whisper. Not just a rustle of leaves, but a voice. Familiar. Close. At Holly her heart froze. It was Daniel's voice, soft but unmistakable, like a breeze brushing against her soul. She blinked rapidly, tears welling in her eyes. "Daniel, is that you?" The whisper came again, this time more urgent. "Help me," the words sliced through her, chilling her to the bone. Daniel wasn't at peace. He was trapped, bound to this world by something darker than she had imagined. Holly's mind raced, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. She had come here seeking comfort, but instead found herself gripped by terror. "Where are you?" she called out. The branches of the willow quivered, and the earth beneath her feet rumbled faintly. A strange force seemed to pulse through the ground, pulling her toward the base of the tree. Without thinking, she reached out to touch the rough bark, her fingers trembling. Instantly, the world shifted. Holly found herself standing in a dark, foggy version of the cemetery, but the air was colder, the ground more brittle. The willow's branches no longer swayed gently but hung still, lifeless. And then she saw them, the shadows. Figures, pale and gaunt, lingering near the tree, their hollow eyes fixed on her. They moved without sound, their faces twisted in agony. And then she saw him. Daniel. He stood just beyond the reach of the branches, his face gaunt, eyes hollow. His once warm smile had vanished, replaced with a look of pure dread. Holly's breath caught in her throat as she stepped toward him. "Daniel," she cried. But he raised his hand, warning her to stop. "No, Holly, you can't. It's not safe." "What do you mean?" "I came to find you." He shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't have come here, the tree. It traps souls. It feeds on grief, on those who come seeking the dead. The willow wasn't a gateway to comfort. It was a prison for lost souls, and now it had claimed her too." Panic surged through her, but when she tried to move, she found her legs rooted to the ground, her body unwilling to obey. The other figures began to draw closer, their whispers blending together into a sinister murmur. They circled around her, eyes fixed with a hunger that made her stomach churn. Daniel's voice broke through the din. "Listen to me. You can still get out, but you have to be strong. The tree, it wants to keep you. It feeds on despair. Don't give in." She tried to move again. Her body responded, inching away from the gnarled trunk. But as she turned to run, the ground cracked beneath her, and the roots of the willow surged up like skeletal hands, grasping at her ankles. The shadows reached for her too, their ghostly fingers clawing at her skin. "Oh, Holly!" Daniel shouted, his voice strained with desperation. With a scream, Holly wrenched her legs free, stumbling away from the grasping roots. The shadows hissed, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. She ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind barely able to process what was happening. Behind her, the willow's branches whipped violently in the wind, as if enraged by her escape. But she didn't stop running until she had cleared the graveyard, the ominous figure of the tree shrinking into the distance. When she finally collapsed on the wet grass, far from the reach of the willow's branches, the whispers ceased. The night fell into an unsettling quiet. But Holly knew the truth now. The willow wasn't a place of peace. It was a trap, a dark entity that lured in the grieving with false promises of reunion. And it wasn't finished with her. Not yet. As she lay there, panting and trembling, she could still hear the faintest echo of Daniel's voice in the back of her mind. "Help me," the weeping willow would call her back one day, and when it did. Holly sat motionless in the cold grass, staring back at the silhouette of the willow. Her body ached, and her mind swelled with the horror of what she had witnessed. The graveyard behind her felt alive in its silence, watching, waiting. She knew that, running from the tree had only bought her time, but it hadn't freed her. The whispers still lingered in her thoughts, a quiet thrum that refused to fade. She rose slowly, legs shaky beneath her, and made her way home, the night pressing in around her like a suffocating blanket. The small cottage she once shared with Daniel stood empty and dark, a hollow reminder of the life she had lost. As Holly opened the door, she hesitated, half expecting the whispers to follow her inside, to invade her sanctuary. But the air was still, almost too still. The house had become a shell since Daniel's death. Pictures of their life together lined the mantel, smiling faces captured in moments that felt like they belonged to someone else. Holly moved numbly through the space, her fingers brushing against the frames as if trying to reach into the past. She collapsed into an armchair, the weight of exhaustion finally overwhelming her. For the first time since Daniel's passing, she didn't cry. The numbness had spread too deep. Her mind kept drifting back to the cemetery, to the moment she had seen Daniel, his hollow eyes, his warning. The tree that trapped souls, the words echoed in her head like a curse. She knew she couldn't ignore what had happened. The willow had ensnared her, and Daniel was still trapped, suffering. Holly couldn't shake the image of his face, the helplessness in his eyes. But what could she do? How could she fight something as ancient and powerful as that tree? Her gaze flickered to the old leather-bound book lying on the coffee table. It was a relic from her mother's collection, one filled with superstitions, folklore, and forgotten rituals. Holly had dismissed its contents as fantasy before, but after tonight, nothing seemed impossible. She reached for it, her hands trembling as she flipped through its yellowed pages. There, near the back, was an entry that sent a chill down her spine. The soul trees, guardians or takers, the passage detailed legends about trees like the willow, believed to act as guardians of the dead but also as predators of grief. They could offer solace to the living by allowing brief connections with the deceased. But the cost was steep. For each moment of peace, the tree would take a piece of the living soul, slowly consuming them until they, too, became trapped beneath its roots. Holly's stomach churned as she read further. There was only one way to free a soul bound to the tree, a ritual, dangerous and forbidden. It required confronting the tree directly, offering something in return for the soul's release, something of great value. The book was vague on what that something was, but Holly had a sinking feeling she already knew. Her own life. Holly slammed the book shut, her heart racing. Was she really willing to sacrifice herself? Could she leave behind the world, even if it meant saving Daniel? The thought of Daniel's tortured face came to her again, and a painful ache spread through her chest. She had already lost him once. Could she bear the thought of him being trapped forever, consumed by that dark entity? The night dragged on, and sleep evaded her. Every time she closed her eyes, the whispering started again, faint but insistent, as though the willow was calling her back. "Help me," it said. Holly helped me by dawn. Her decision was made. The next night, Holly returned to the cemetery, armed with nothing but the book and a flickering lantern. The fog was thicker this time, clinging to the ground in wisps like grasping fingers. The willow loomed ahead, its dark branches swaying in a wind that didn't seem to touch anything else around it. As she approached, the whispers returned, low and mournful, threading through the air. The temperature dropped sharply, and Holly could see her breath misting in front of her. She clutched the book tighter, her pulse racing, fear gnawing at the edges of her resolve. "I am here," she whispered. "I have come to help him." The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with energy. The branches rustled, and the wind picked up, swirling around her in a slow, deliberate dance. Holly." Daniel's voice, but it sounded weaker now, more distant. She could sense the pull of the tree, the way it wanted to keep him, to claim her as well. She opened the book and read the passage aloud, her voice shaky but determined. The ritual was simple, but its meaning weighed heavy on her heart. The final step required her to offer something precious, something that tied her to the world. Holly closed her eyes, clutching the locket around her neck. It was the last piece of Daniel she had left, a symbol of their love, their life together. She unclasped it, holding it in her palm, the metal warm against her skin despite the cold. "I offer this." "Take it, and let him go." The wind howled. Holly's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, placing the locket at the base of the tree. The moment it touched the ground, the earth trembled, and a deep, resonant groan emanated from the roots. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the air around her began to shift. The oppressive weight that had clung to her since entering the cemetery lifted, replaced by a soft, almost peaceful calm. Holly." Daniel's voice was clear now, full of warmth. She looked up, and through the branches she saw him, not the hollow, gaunt figure from before, but the man she remembered. His face was calm, his eyes free of pain. "Thank you," he whispered. Tears streamed down Holly's face as she watched him disappear. She had freed him, but in doing so, she felt a part of herself slip away as well. The locket, the memories, they were now bound to the tree. The price had been paid. As the sun began to rise, Holly turned away from the weeping willow, her heart lighter yet haunted by the knowledge that the tree still stood, waiting, watching, and she knew, deep down, that the whispers would return one day, because the willow never truly let go. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had a great day.